He thought it was just another low-paying job, sweeping dust from broken floors, trying to survive another day. But hidden in the shadows of that old house, he found a letter sealed in time, words from a father long gone, written to a son who never got to hear them. Reading it would shake him to his core and set him and his little boy on a journey they never expected. Because that letter didn't just belong to the past, it held the key to a future they never dreamed possible. But just when hope seemed within reach, a powerful enemy rose to take everything away. Will this single dad's fight for a home become his greatest defeat, or the miracle that changes his son's life forever? Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. The morning sun barely squeezed through the thin curtains of the small apartment as Jack Miller stood at the tiny kitchen counter, carefully spreading peanut butter on wheat bread. The knife scraped the bottom of the jar, and he made a mental note to add it to his growing list of needed groceries. His movements were deliberate, almost mechanical, born from years of morning routines in this cramped space. A floorboard creaked behind him, and Jack turned to see Ethan shuffling into the kitchen, his backpack dragging on the floor. The boy's hair stuck up at odd angles, and his Spider-Man pajamas were wrinkled from sleep. "Morning, buddy," Jack said, managing a warm smile despite the weight in his chest. "Sleep okay?" Ethan nodded, climbing onto one of the mismatched chairs at their small table. The radiator was making funny noises again. Jack glanced at the old heating unit in the corner, its metal surfaces spotted with rust. "Yeah, it likes to sing at night. Maybe it's practicing for Broadway." That earned him a sleepy giggle from Ethan, and Jack's heart lifted a little. He placed the sandwich and a slightly bruised apple in front of his son, then ruffled his hair. "Eat up, champ. Bus comes in 20 minutes. While Ethan ate, Jack sipped his black coffee. Cream and sugar were luxuries this week, and studied his son's face. Even at 10, Ethan had his mother's kind eyes and gentle spirit. The thought brought a familiar ache, but Jack pushed it aside. There was no time for that now. A sharp knock at the door made them both jump. Jack's stomach tightened as he crossed the small living room, stepping over Ethan's math textbook and around the sagging couch. Through the peephole, he saw only empty hallway. But when he opened the door, a white piece of paper fluttered to his feet. The late rent notice was printed on bright pink paper, impossible to ignore, just as Mr. Henderson intended. Jack's hands trembled slightly as he read the amount due, including late fees. The numbers seemed to grow larger every time he looked at them. "What is it, Dad?" Ethan called from the kitchen. Jack quickly folded the notice and stuffed it in his pocket. "Just some mail, buddy. You about ready for school?" Ethan appeared beside him, now dressed in jeans and his favorite blue sweater, the one with the worn elbows that Jack had carefully patched last winter. Did Mr. Henderson leave another pink paper? The question caught Jack off guard. Sometimes he forgot how observant his son could be. "Yeah, he did. But don't worry about that, okay? That's Dad stuff." Ethan's face grew serious, looking older than his years. "I heard Mrs. Rodriguez say her son might need a math tutor. I could help him after school. I'm good at math." Jack's throat tightened. He knelt down to Ethan's level, placing his hands on his son's shoulders. "Hey, that's really thoughtful of you, but your job is to be a kid and do well in school. Let me handle the rest." "But I want to help," Ethan insisted, his lower lip quivering slightly. Jack pulled him into a hug, breathing in the scent of drugstore shampoo and childhood innocence. "You help me every day just by being you, kiddo. Now go brush your teeth before the bus comes." As Ethan disappeared into their tiny bathroom, Jack leaned against the wall, the pink notice feeling like it was burning a hole in his pocket. The stack of bills on the kitchen counter seemed to mock him. Electric, gas, grocery receipts charged to his nearly maxed out credit card, each one a reminder of how close they were living to the edge. After seeing Ethan off to school, making sure he had his homework and lunch money, Jack sat at the kitchen table with his phone and a notepad. He'd already called every decent-paying job listing in the newspaper, but most wanted experience he didn't have or couldn't work around Ethan's schedule. The phone rang, startling him from his thoughts. The caller ID showed Mike's Auto, and Jack's heart skipped. Mike had been a regular customer at the garage where Jack used to work before it closed down. "Mike? Hey, it's Jack Miller." "Jack! Just the man I was thinking about." Mike's voice crackled through the speaker. "Listen, I've got a cleaning job if you're interested. It's not much. This old house on Cedar Street needs clearing out before it goes on the market." Jack's hope deflated slightly. Cleaning wasn't his specialty, but these days he couldn't afford to be picky. "What's the pay?" Mike named a figure that made Jack wince. It would barely cover half the late rent, but it was something. "When do you need me?" "Can you start today? The sooner it's done, the better." Jack looked at the pink notice on the table, then at the family photo hanging crooked on the wall. Him, Ethan, and Sarah at the beach 3 years ago, before the cancer took her. His wife's smile seemed to encourage him, the way it always had when things got tough. "Yeah," Jack said, his voice firmer now. "Yeah, I can start today." "Great. It's the old Victorian at 1,247 Cedar. You know the one, been empty for years. Keys are under the mat. Just be careful in there. Place is pretty run down." After hanging up, Jack sat in silence for a moment, listening to the rattling radiator and the distant sound of traffic outside. The pay was low, the work would be hard, but it was honest work. And right now, that had to be enough. He stood up, grabbed his worn jacket from the hook by the door, and checked his pocket for the apartment key. The pink notice crinkled as he moved, a reminder of why he couldn't afford to turn down any job, no matter how small. "One day at a time," he muttered to himself, his hand on the doorknob. "Just keep moving forward." The morning light had grown stronger now, filtering through the dirty windows and illuminating the dust motes in the air. As Jack stepped out into the hallway, he squared his shoulders, ready to face whatever the day might bring. For Ethan, he would do whatever it took. Even if that meant cleaning out an old, abandoned house for barely enough money to keep their own roof over their heads. Jack's old pickup truck rattled to a stop in front of the abandoned house, its engine sputtering before falling silent. Through the dusty windshield, father and son stared at the looming structure before them. What might have once been white paint had faded to a dull gray, peeling away in long strips like old wallpaper. The wraparound porch sagged in places, its wooden boards warped from years of neglect. "It's kind of spooky," Ethan said, pressing his face against the passenger window. His breath fogged the glass as he studied the building. "Like those haunted houses in movies." Jack unbuckled his seatbelt and reached for his cleaning supplies in the back seat. "No ghosts here, buddy, just dust and cobwebs." He hadn't planned on bringing Ethan, but his usual sitter had called in sick, and he couldn't afford to miss a day's work. "Remember what we talked about? Stay close to me, and don't wander off." They climbed out of the truck, their feet crunching on the gravel driveway. The morning air was crisp, and their breath came out in small clouds. Jack juggled his cleaning supplies, a worn broom, some rags, and a bucket of cleaning solutions he'd collected over the years. Ethan stayed close to his father's side as they approached the front door. The key, left for them under a flower pot, was cold and heavy in Jack's hand. It took 3 tries to get it to turn in the stubborn lock. The door opened with a long, drawn-out creak that echoed through the empty house. Dust particles danced in the thin streams of light that filtered through the grimy windows. The air inside was stale, carrying the musty smell of abandonment. "Wow," Ethan whispered, his voice seeming too loud in the quiet space. "It's huge inside." The entrance hall opened into a grand staircase, its wooden banister dulled by years of dust. To their right, a living room stretched out, furnished with sheet-covered shapes that might have been couches and chairs. To their left, what appeared to be a dining room waited in shadow. Jack set down his cleaning supplies and pulled out a flashlight from his back pocket. "Stay where I can see you, okay?" He clicked it on, the beam cutting through the gloom. "I need to check the power." They made their way through the first floor, their footsteps echoing on the hardwood floors. Each step brought a new creak or groan from the old house, as if it was slowly waking up from a long sleep. Jack found the electrical panel in the kitchen and, after some fiddling, managed to get the lights working. "It's not so scary with the lights on," Ethan observed, though he still stayed close to his father. Jack surveyed the space, mentally calculating how long it would take to clean. The job paid barely enough to cover next week's groceries, but he couldn't afford to be picky. "Let's start from the top and work our way down," he said, picking up his supplies. "The attic first." The stairs to the second floor protested under their weight, each step accompanied by a chorus of creaks. Family portraits lined the walls, their faces barely visible under layers of dust and cobwebs. Ethan counted them as they climbed. "Look, Dad," he pointed to one particularly large frame. "They kind of look like us." Jack paused, studying the faded photograph. A father and son stood in what looked like the house's backyard, both smiling at the camera. Something about their expressions made his chest tighten, and he quickly moved on. The attic access was at the end of the upstairs hallway, a pull-down ladder that descended with a shower of dust, making them both cough. Jack tested each rung carefully before allowing Ethan to follow him up. The attic space was larger than Jack expected, extending the full length of the house. Weak morning light filtered through 2 small windows at either end, illuminating years of accumulated storage. Old furniture, boxes, trunks, and items whose shapes were impossible to distinguish under their dusty shrouds. "This is going to take forever," Jack muttered, more to himself than to Ethan. He set up a camping lantern he'd brought, casting a broader light across the space. "Okay, buddy, you can help by holding the dustpan while I sweep. Just the main walkway for now." Ethan nodded seriously, taking his assigned task with the gravity of a military mission. Jack began sweeping, starting from the far corner and working his way back toward the ladder. The dust was thick, coming up in clouds that made them both sneeze despite their face masks. About halfway through the attic, Jack's broom caught on something. He pushed harder, but instead of clearing the dust, there was a distinct hollow sound. The broom had caught between two floorboards that seemed slightly raised compared to the others. "What's that sound?" Ethan asked, moving closer with the dustpan. Jack crouched down, running his fingers along the edges of the boards. They shifted slightly under his touch. "These boards are loose," he said, working his fingers into the gap. With a grunt of effort, he managed to lift one board, then another. The beam of his flashlight revealed a small space beneath the floorboards. There, nestled in decades of dust, sat a wooden box about the size of a shoebox. It was made of dark wood, simply constructed but solid, with no obvious markings or decorations. "Dad, look!" Ethan's eyes were wide with excitement. "It's like treasure!" Jack reached down and carefully lifted the box from its hiding place. It was lighter than he expected, and something inside shifted when he moved it. The wooden box sat between Jack and Ethan on the dusty attic floor, its surface coated with decades of grime. Weak sunlight filtered through a small window, casting long shadows across the weathered floorboards. Jack ran his calloused hands over the box's lid, wiping away layers of dust with his shirt sleeve. "What do you think is inside, Dad?" Ethan whispered, leaning closer. His eyes sparkled with curiosity as he watched his father's careful movements. "Only one way to find out, buddy." Jack's fingers found the simple metal latch. It was stiff from age, but with a gentle push, it finally gave way with a soft click. The lid creaked as Jack lifted it slowly. A musty smell wafted up, the scent of memories long forgotten. Inside, carefully preserved items lay wrapped in what looked like an old handkerchief. Jack gently lifted out the bundle and placed it on the floor between them. "Look at this, Ethan." Jack carefully unfolded the yellowed fabric. Inside were several black and white photographs, their edges slightly curved with age. The first showed a young man in military uniform, his stance proud and strong. The next revealed the same man with a woman and small boy, all three smiling at the camera in front of a Christmas tree. "They look happy," Ethan observed, touching the photograph's edge with gentle fingers. "They do," Jack agreed, his voice soft. He set the photos aside and reached back into the box. His fingers brushed against something smooth, an envelope, yellowed with age but still sealed. The paper felt delicate, like it might crumble at too rough a touch. In neat handwriting across the front were the words, "My dearest son." Jack's breath caught in his throat. He held the envelope carefully, as if it were made of glass. The weight of what they'd found settled over both of them. This wasn't just old papers. This was someone's message, preserved in time. "Should we open it, Dad?" Ethan asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Jack hesitated. "I don't know, buddy. It's not meant for us. But what if the person it's meant for never got to read it? Maybe they should know what it says." Ethan's words carried a wisdom beyond his years, making Jack look at his son with pride. After a moment's thought, Jack nodded. "You're right. Someone should know what this father wanted to tell his son." With trembling fingers, he carefully broke the seal, trying not to damage the aged paper. Inside was a single sheet of paper, covered in the same neat handwriting as the envelope. Jack cleared his throat and began to read. "My dearest son, if you're reading this, it means I didn't make it home from the war. I'm writing this letter the night before I ship out, watching you sleep in your bed, peaceful and innocent to the troubles of this world. You're only 5 years old now, too young to understand why Daddy has to go away. I want you to know how much I love you. Every moment I've had with you has been the greatest blessing of my life. Your first steps, your first words, the way you laugh when I toss you in the air, these memories will be with me wherever I go. Remember the house we just bought? The one with the big porch where you love to play? I had so many dreams for us there. I imagined teaching you to ride your bike in the driveway, building a treehouse in the old oak out back, watching you grow up in a home filled with love and laughter. I need you to know something important. Being brave doesn't mean you're never scared. It means doing what's right even when you are scared. I'm scared right now, son. Scared I won't see you grow up, scared I won't be there to guide you. But I'm going because it's right, because protecting you and our way of life is worth any sacrifice. Promise me you'll take care of your mother. Promise me you'll study hard in school and follow your dreams. Promise me you'll never let fear stop you from doing what's in your heart. Most importantly, promise me you'll remember how much your father loves you. Keep faith, son. Even in the darkest night, hold on to hope. Know that wherever I am, I'm watching over you, proud of the man you'll become. With all my love, Dad. Jack's voice cracked on the final words. He looked up to find tears streaming down Ethan's face, matching the ones he felt on his own cheeks. The attic was silent, except for their quiet breathing and the distant sound of wind through the old house's eaves. Ethan wiped his eyes with his sleeve. "Dad," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion, "we have to find who this belongs to." The kitchen table in Jack and Ethan's small apartment was barely big enough for their dinner plates, let alone the scattered papers and laptop they now had spread across its surface. The soldier's letter lay carefully placed in the center, protected in a clear plastic sleeve Jack had found in his toolbox. The yellowed paper seemed to glow under the harsh fluorescent light hanging above them. "Thomas Raymond Henderson," Ethan read aloud from the signature at the bottom of the letter, his finger carefully tracing the air above the name. "That's the soldier's name, right, Dad?" Jack nodded, his eyes fixed on the laptop screen. The old computer whirred loudly as he typed the name into a search engine. "That's right, buddy." And the letters dated June 15, 1967. He glanced at his son, who was already scribbling the information down in his school notebook. Empty takeout containers from their quick dinner sat forgotten on the counter. Usually, Jack insisted on proper meals at the table, but tonight was different. Tonight, they were on a mission. "Look here," Ethan said, pointing to an old newspaper article he'd found in the town library's online archives. "There's a Thomas Henderson who lived on Oak Street. That's where the old house is." Jack leaned over to look. His son was right. There was a mention of a Thomas Henderson in a 1966 article about local men being deployed to Vietnam. The address matched the abandoned house they'd been cleaning earlier that day. "Good work, detective," Jack said, ruffling Ethan's hair. His son beamed at the praise, sitting up straighter in his chair. They worked together for another hour, Ethan reading out information while Jack cross-referenced dates and addresses. The boy's enthusiasm never wavered, even as the clock ticked past his usual bedtime. Jack couldn't help but notice how his son's eyes shone with determination, the same look his mother used to get when she was focused on something important. "Dad," Ethan's excited voice broke through Jack's memories. "I found something." He pushed his notebook across the table, pointing to a recent article from the local newspaper's website. Jack squinted at the small screen of their shared laptop. The article was about the town's Veterans Day celebration from the previous year. There, in a group photo of elderly veterans' family members, was a caption that made his heart skip, including Michael Henderson, son of the late Private Thomas Henderson. "He's alive," Jack whispered, almost to himself. "The son. He's still here." Ethan practically bounced in his chair. "Can we find him? Can we give him his dad's letter?" Jack clicked through several more links, his excitement growing. It took another 30 minutes of searching, but finally, they found what they were looking for. Michael Henderson was listed as a resident at Sunnyside Care Home, just on the outskirts of town. "It's only 15 minutes away," Jack said, writing down the address. He looked at his watch and sighed. "But it's already 9:30 p.m., way past visiting hours." Ethan's face fell slightly, but then brightened again. "Tomorrow's Saturday. We can go first thing in the morning, right?" Jack looked at his son's hopeful expression, then at the letter that had brought them on this unexpected journey. The words he'd read earlier echoed in his mind. A father's love reaching across decades, waiting to be delivered to a son who never got to read them. "Tell you what," Jack said, gathering their research papers into a neat pile. "If you get ready for bed right now, we'll go first thing tomorrow morning. Promise." "Really?" Ethan's eyes lit up. "You don't have any jobs tomorrow?" Jack shook his head. "Nothing that can't wait. This is more important." Ethan jumped up from his chair and hugged his father tightly. "Thanks, Dad. I'll go brush my teeth right now." As Ethan rushed off to the bathroom, Jack carefully folded the letter and placed it back in its sleeve. He thought about Michael Henderson, wondering what kind of man he'd become without his father's guidance. The letter spoke of dreams and hopes for a son's future. Dreams that had sat hidden in that attic for over 50 years. While Ethan got ready for bed, Jack tidied up their research materials, making sure everything was organized for tomorrow's visit. He could hear his son humming in the bathroom, probably rushing through his bedtime routine in excitement. "All done," Ethan announced, appearing in his pajamas. "Can we bring the letter in something nice? It shouldn't just be in a plastic sleeve." Jack thought for a moment, then remembered something. He went to his bedroom closet and pulled out an old wooden box, one of the few things he had left from his own father. It was simple but well made, with a hinged lid that closed securely. "How about this?" he asked, showing it to Ethan. "It's perfect," Ethan said softly, running his fingers over the smooth wood. "Mr. Henderson's dad's letter should be in something special like this." Jack placed the letter, still in its protective sleeve, inside the box. "Time for bed now, buddy. Tomorrow's going to be a big day." As he tucked Ethan into bed, his son looked up at him with serious eyes. "Dad, do you think Mr. Henderson will be happy to get his dad's letter?" Jack sat on the edge of the bed, considering the question. "I don't know, buddy. It might make him sad at first, thinking about his dad. But I think he'll be glad to have it. Sometimes even sad things can be good things too." Ethan nodded thoughtfully. "Like when we look at Mom's pictures?" Jack's throat tightened, but he managed to smile. "Exactly like that." He leaned down and kissed his son's forehead. "Get some sleep now. We'll head to Sunnyside first thing in the morning. Promise?" Ethan asked, already yawning. "Promise," Jack replied, turning off the bedside lamp. "First thing tomorrow." The automatic doors of Sunshine Valley Nursing Home slid open with a soft hiss. Jack hesitated for a moment, his hand resting protectively on Ethan's shoulder. The familiar scent of disinfectant and the quiet murmur of daytime television drifted from the common room. An elderly woman shuffled past them in her walker, offering a gentle smile. "Can I help you?" The receptionist looked up from her computer, her name tag reading Sandra. Jack cleared his throat. "Yes, we're here to see James Henderson?" His voice lifted at the end, uncertain. Sandra's fingers tapped at her keyboard. "Ah, yes, Mr. Henderson. He's in room 217. She studied them curiously. Are you family?" "No, ma'am," Ethan piped up, clutching the plastic sleeve containing the letter. "But we have something really important for him." Jack squeezed his son's shoulder. "We found a letter that belongs to him. From his father." Sandra's expression softened. "Down that hallway, second floor. He might be a bit particular about visitors. Just so you know." They took the elevator up, their reflections distorted in the metal doors. Jack noticed his wrinkled work shirt and wished he'd thought to change. Ethan, however, had insisted they come right after school, still wearing his backpack. The second floor was quieter than the lobby. Names and room numbers marked each door they passed. Some rooms had decorations, photos, drawings from grandchildren, seasonal wreaths. Room 217 was bare, except for the number plate. Jack knocked softly. "What is it?" A gruff voice called from inside. Taking a deep breath, Jack opened the door. The room was sparse but neat. An elderly man sat in an armchair by the window, a book open in his lap. His white hair was combed back, and despite the irritation in his voice, his blue eyes were sharp and alert. "Mr. Henderson?" Jack stepped inside, guiding Ethan with him. "I'm Jack Miller, and this is my son, Ethan. We found something that belongs to you." James Henderson's expression remained guarded. "I don't know any Millers." "No, sir," Jack said. "We were cleaning the old house on Oak Street yesterday." "My father's house?" Henderson interrupted, his voice suddenly tight. "What were you doing there?" "I work as a cleaner," Jack explained. "While we were in the attic, we found something hidden under the floorboards." He nodded to Ethan, who stepped forward with the letter. "It's from your dad," Ethan said softly. "He wrote it for you before he went away." The old man's hands trembled slightly as he took the plastic sleeve. His eyes widened as he recognized the handwriting on the envelope. This can't be." He looked up at them. "I never knew this existed." "Would you like us to leave while you read it?" Jack offered. Henderson shook his head slowly. No, please stay." His fingers fumbled with the sleeve. Would you mind reading it?" "My eyes aren't what they used to be." Ethan looked at his father, who nodded encouragingly. The boy carefully removed the letter and unfolded it. The paper crackled softly in the quiet room. Henderson leaned forward in his chair, his hands gripping the armrests. "My dearest son," Ethan began, his young voice clear and steady. "If you're reading this, it means I didn't make it home. I'm writing this the night before we ship out, watching you sleep in your bed. You're only 6, too young to understand why Daddy has to go away." Jack watched as the old man's expression changed, decades of hardness melting away. Ethan continued reading, sharing the father's dreams for his son's future, his hopes that James would grow up strong and kind, his regret at not being there to see it happen. "Remember, son, that even in the darkest night, hold on to hope. Your mother will need you to be brave, but it's okay to cry sometimes too. Know that I'm proud of you, so proud, and that I love you more than all the stars in the sky." Tears rolled down Henderson's weathered cheeks. His hand reached out, trembling, and found Jack's. His grip was surprisingly strong as Ethan finished reading the letter. "You've given me peace I never thought I'd know," Henderson whispered, his voice thick with emotion. The soldier's son, Thomas Walker, sat in his wheelchair by the window, tears still glistening on his weathered cheeks. His gnarled fingers traced the edges of his father's letter, now carefully protected in a clear plastic sleeve that Ethan had thoughtfully provided. "You know," Thomas said, his voice rough with emotion, "I spent my whole life angry at him for not coming home. I thought he'd abandoned us." He looked up at Jack and Ethan, his pale blue eyes bright. "But now I know. He never stopped thinking about me." Jack shifted uncomfortably in the hard plastic chair beside Thomas. "We're just glad we could return it to you, Mr. Walker. Please, call me Tom." The old man straightened in his wheelchair, seeming to gather his thoughts. "That house you found this in, it was our family home. My mother sold it after we got the news about Dad. I never had the heart to go back." Ethan, who had been quietly watching from his perch on the windowsill, piped up. "It's a beautiful house, Mr. Tom, even if it's a bit dusty now." Thomas chuckled, the sound warming the sterile air of the nursing home room. "That it was, son, that it was." His expression grew serious as he looked at Jack. "I never married, you know. No kids of my own. That property, it's still in my name. Been sitting there all these years, gathering dust and memories." Jack felt his throat tighten. Something in Thomas's tone made his heart beat faster. "Mr. Miller," Thomas continued, reaching for a folder on his bedside table with trembling hands. "I've been thinking about what to do with that place for years. The lawyers come by every so often, asking me to sell to developers, but I could never bring myself to do it." He pulled out some papers, carefully smoothing their creased edges. "Would you believe I've had these drawn up for months? Just waiting for the right moment, the right person?" Jack's eyes widened as he recognized the legal letterhead. "Mr. Walker, I don't understand." "These are deed transfer papers," Thomas said firmly. "That house needs a family again. It needs children's laughter, and Christmas mornings, and birthday parties." His eyes crinkled as he smiled at Ethan. "It needs a young man's dreams to fill its rooms." "We couldn't possibly," Jack started to protest, but Thomas held up a hand. "You brought me peace, Mr. Miller. After 60 years of wondering, of being angry, you brought me my father's words." He pressed the papers toward Jack. "Let me do this, please." Ethan had moved closer, his eyes wide with wonder. "Dad?" he whispered, hope trembling in his voice. Jack looked at the papers, then at his son's face. They'd been struggling for so long, moving from one cramped apartment to another, always one missed payment away from disaster. The thought of stability, of a real home. "The taxes," Jack began practically, but Thomas was already shaking his head. "It's all taken care of. I've set up a trust to cover property taxes for the next 5 years. That should give you time to get on your feet." He smiled. "I may be old, but I'm not foolish. I want this to be a blessing, not a burden." A nurse appeared in the doorway, carrying Thomas's medication. "Time for your pills, Mr. Walker." "Just a moment, Nancy," Thomas said, pulling a pen from his drawer. His hand shook as he signed the papers, but his signature was clear and decisive. "Your turn, Mr. Miller." Jack felt like he was in a dream as he took the pen. The weight of it in his hand seemed impossibly heavy with possibility. He looked at Ethan, saw the hope shining in his boy's eyes, and signed his name. Thomas smiled, satisfied. "Nancy, here's a notary. Aren't we lucky?" He winked at Ethan. The nurse efficiently notarized the documents, making small talk as she helped Thomas with his medication. Jack sat in stunned silence, holding the papers that would change their lives forever. "There's one more thing," Thomas said, reaching for a small box under his bed. "The key. It's old-fashioned. They don't make them like this anymore." He pressed a heavy brass key into Jack's palm. "Take care of her, won't you? That house has been waiting for the right family." Ethan approached Thomas's wheelchair, surprising everyone by giving the old man a gentle hug. "Thank you, Mr. Tom. We'll make it beautiful again." Thomas patted Ethan's back, his eyes misty. "You already have, son. You already have." The nurse helped them make copies of all the documents, and soon they were walking through the nursing home's corridors, their footsteps echoing on the linoleum floors. Jack clutched the folder containing the deed papers, still unable to believe what had just happened. As they pushed through the automatic doors into the afternoon sunlight, Ethan grabbed his father's hand, something he hadn't done in public for months, claiming he was too old for that now. "Dad," he said, his face glowing with joy, "we have a real home now." Jack squeezed his son's hand, feeling the warmth of the sun on his face and the weight of the house key in his pocket. For the first time in years, he felt something he'd almost forgotten: hope. Jack and Ethan stood at the entrance of their newly acquired house, keys jingling in Jack's trembling hand. The afternoon sun streamed through the dusty windows, casting long shadows across the wooden floors. Despite the cobwebs and years of neglect, both father and son saw something beautiful. They saw possibility. "Can you believe it, Dad?" Ethan bounced on his toes, his eyes bright with excitement. "Our very own house!" Jack smiled, ruffling his son's hair. "Let's take another look around, buddy. But this time, let's think about what we want to do with each room." They stepped into the living room, their footsteps echoing against the bare walls. Ethan spun in circles, arms spread wide. "We could paint these walls yellow, like sunshine, and maybe put a big, comfy couch right here." He pointed to a spot near the bay window. "Yellow, huh?" Jack chuckled, already picturing weekends spent with paintbrushes in hand. That would definitely brighten things up. Moving through the house, they discovered new details they hadn't noticed during their cleaning job. The kitchen had old-fashioned cabinets with glass fronts, perfect for displaying dishes. The wooden banister leading upstairs was carved with delicate patterns under layers of dust. "Look at these built-in shelves, Dad." Ethan ran his fingers along the empty bookcase that lined one wall. "I could put all my books here, and maybe that model airplane we're building together." Jack nodded, his throat tight with emotion. For years, he'd watched Ethan try to make the best of their tiny apartment, storing his few possessions in boxes under his bed. Now his son could spread out, could have space to grow. They climbed the creaking stairs to the second floor. Ethan darted from room to room, claiming the smallest bedroom as his own. "It has the best view of the backyard," he declared, pressing his nose against the window glass. Jack joined him at the window, looking out at the overgrown yard below. "Speaking of the backyard, what do you think about planting a garden? We could grow our own vegetables." "Really?" Ethan's eyes widened. "Could we plant tomatoes? And maybe some flowers for Mom?" Jack wrapped an arm around his son's shoulders, squeezing gently. "That's a wonderful idea, buddy. Mom would have loved that." They spent the next hour planning and dreaming. Ethan pulled out a notepad from his backpack and started making lists. Things we need and things we want to do. Jack watched as his son's neat handwriting filled the pages with items like paint for walls, seeds for garden, and big welcome mat for front door. In the kitchen, Jack tested the faucets. They'd need some work, but the pipes seemed solid. The old stove would have to be replaced, but he could handle that. Years of fixing things for other people had taught him plenty about home repairs. "Dad," Ethan called from the back door, "come look at this." Jack followed his son's voice to find him standing on a small back porch. The wooden boards creaked under their feet, but the structure was sturdy enough. "We could put chairs out here," Ethan said, gesturing enthusiastically. "And maybe hang one of those porch swings like Mrs. Martinez has at her house. We could sit out here and watch the stars at night." Jack's heart swelled. After years of struggle, watching his son's face light up with hope and excitement felt like a miracle. This house wasn't just walls and a roof. It was a chance to give Ethan the childhood he deserved. They were discussing where to plant the vegetable garden when a sharp knock at the front door echoed through the empty house. The sound was authoritative, demanding attention. "Stay here, buddy," Jack said, patting Ethan's shoulder before heading to the front door. Opening it, Jack found himself face to face with a man in an expensive suit, holding a leather briefcase. His polished appearance seemed out of place on the worn front porch. "Mr. Miller?" The man's voice was crisp and professional. "I'm Richard Hale, attorney for Riverside Development Corporation." He extracted a thick envelope from his briefcase. "I'm here to serve you notice regarding this property." Jack's stomach clenched. "Notice?" "Yes. I'm afraid this house is already tied up in development plans. The entire block is slated for demolition to make way for luxury condominiums." He held out the envelope. "These documents outline the legal dispute regarding ownership rights. You'll find all the relevant court dates and contact information inside." Jack took the envelope, his hands numb. Behind him, he heard Ethan's footsteps approaching. "Dad?" Ethan's voice was small, uncertain. "What's going on?" The attorney's eyes flickered to Ethan, then back to Jack. His expression softened slightly, but his voice remained firm. "I suggest you review these documents with legal counsel as soon as possible, Mr. Miller. Time is of the essence in these matters." The kitchen was dim as evening settled in, with only a single battery-powered lantern casting a warm glow across the old wooden table. Jack and Ethan sat side by side, the soldier's letter spread carefully between them. The paper had taken on an almost golden hue in the lantern light, its creases deep from years of being folded. "Read it again, Dad," Ethan whispered, his small hand resting on the edge of the yellowed paper. Please? Jack nodded, clearing his throat. His voice was soft but steady as he began to read the familiar words. My dearest son, if you're reading this, it means I didn't make it home. But don't be sad. I want you to know that every step I took, every choice I made, was to make sure you'd have a better tomorrow. Ethan closed his eyes, letting the words wash over him. Jack paused, his finger tracing the careful handwriting. The sound of crickets filtered in through a broken window pane, nature's quiet symphony accompanying the letter's message. The house may not look like much now, Jack continued reading, but it was built with love. Your grandfather's hands laid these floors. Your grandmother planted the roses that still bloom in spring. Every nail, every board holds our family's story. A cool breeze rustled through the kitchen, making the lantern's flame dance. Empty cabinets creaked, and somewhere upstairs, loose shutters tapped against the siding. But these sounds didn't frighten them anymore. They were the house's heartbeat, its way of reminding them it was still alive. We can fix it up, Dad, Ethan said, his voice full of determination. I can help. I'm good at organizing things, and I can hold the flashlight when you're working. Remember how I helped Mrs. Peterson clean her garage last summer? Jack smiled, remembering how proud Ethan had been of earning his first $5. You're right, buddy. You're a great helper. The lawyer's notice lay crumpled on the far end of the table, its threatening words temporarily forgotten. Jack reached for it now, smoothing out the wrinkles. The legal language was complicated, but the message was clear. A development company claimed they had prior rights to the property. They wanted to tear it down, replace it with something modern and expensive. Ethan watched his father's face carefully. What are we going to do? Jack set the notice aside and picked up the soldier's letter again. Listen to this part, Ethan. It's important. His finger found the paragraph near the bottom. Life will throw obstacles in your path, son. There will be times when giving up seems easier than going on. But remember, our family doesn't quit. We face our challenges head on, with courage and faith. Just like us, right, Dad? Ethan's eyes shone in the lantern light. We're not quitters either. Jack looked around the kitchen. Despite its current state, he could see what it could become. New paint on the walls, fixed cabinets, a proper stove where he could teach Ethan to cook. The window over the sink needed replacing, but it faced east, perfect for watching the sunrise while having breakfast together. You know what I see when I look around? Jack asked, putting his arm around Ethan's shoulders. What? I see Saturday morning pancakes. I see homework spread out on a clean table. I see Christmas dinners and birthday celebrations. I see a home, Ethan. Our home. Ethan leaned against his father's side. Me too, Dad. And look, the soldier's son gave it to us fair and square. He wanted us to have it. Jack nodded, remembering the old man's trembling hands as he signed over the deed. The emotion in his eyes when he'd said, This house needs a family again. It needs life and love and dreams. Promise me you'll give it that. The lantern flickered, its battery starting to fade. Jack reached into his pocket and pulled out their last spare set. As he changed them, Ethan carefully folded the soldier's letter and placed it back in its envelope. Dad? Ethan's voice was quiet but determined. Remember when you taught me about promises? How they're sacred and we should never make ones we can't keep? I remember, buddy. Well, I think we made a promise to the soldier's son. And to the soldier too, kind of. We promised to bring this house back to life. We can't let those developers break that promise. Jack felt something stir in his chest. Pride, determination, and a fierce love for his son who understood so much about honor and keeping your word. The weight of the lawyer's notice seemed lighter now, less threatening. The letter says we shouldn't quit, Ethan continued, his young face serious in the lantern light. And we won't, will we, Dad? Jack pulled his son close, feeling the warmth of his small body, the trust in his embrace. Outside, the crickets sang their evening song, and the old house creaked and settled around them, as if listening for his answer. Looking into Ethan's hopeful eyes, Jack took a deep breath and vowed, We're not giving up. This house is ours, and we'll fight for it. The morning sun cast long shadows across the cracked sidewalks as Jack walked through the neighborhood, the soldier's letter safely tucked in a protective folder under his arm. His work boots scuffed against the concrete as he approached the first house, his heart pounding. He'd never been good at asking for help. Mrs. Rodriguez, the elderly woman who'd lived on the street for 40 years, opened her door before he could even knock. Jack Miller, is everything okay with little Ethan? Yes, ma'am, Jack said, clearing his throat. I actually wanted to share something with you, if you have a minute. She invited him in, her small living room filled with family photos and the smell of fresh coffee. Jack carefully removed the letter from its folder and told her about finding it. about the old soldier's son, and about the developer's threats. Mrs. Rodriguez listened intently, her weathered hands folded in her lap. When Jack finished reading the letter, she wiped her eyes with a tissue. "My Roberto," she said softly, pointing to a military photo on her wall. "He wrote letters like this before he was lost in Vietnam. This house you're fighting for. It's more than just walls and windows, isn't it?" Jack nodded, emotion thick in his throat. "Count me in," she said firmly. "I'll talk to the other neighbors. We won't let them tear down our history." Throughout the morning, Jack visited more homes. Some doors remained closed, but others opened. Mr. Chin, who ran the corner grocery store, listened while stocking shelves. "My father came here after the war," he said. "He understood the importance of having roots, of building something lasting. I'll sign any petition you need." By noon, Jack stood before the Veterans of Foreign Wars Hall, its flag snapping in the breeze. Inside, the air was heavy with cigarette smoke and memories. A group of veterans sat at their usual table, playing cards and trading stories. Commander Phillips, a tall man with silver hair and sharp eyes, read the letter twice. The room had gone quiet, the card game forgotten. "Boys," he finally said, his voice rough, "we've got ourselves a situation here." One by one, the veterans shared their own stories of letters written home, of hopes for their children's futures. They understood, deep in their bones, what this soldier had felt when he wrote those words to his son. "This isn't just about one house," Commander Phillips declared. "It's about respecting sacrifice, about keeping promises to those who came before us. We'll help you, Jack. We'll make some noise these developers can't ignore." At the local church, Reverend Grace listened with her usual gentle attention. The afternoon light filtered through stained glass windows, painting rainbow patterns on the wooden pews. "The congregation meets tomorrow," she said. "Share this story with them. Sometimes God works through letters and lost things to bring communities together." Jack's last stop was the most difficult. The local newspaper office was small but intimidating, with its walls of awards and busy reporters typing at their desks. Sarah Chin, a young reporter who'd covered local stories for years, sat with him in the break room. "This is exactly the kind of story people need to hear," she said, carefully photographing the letter. "It's about family, heritage, and standing up to big money. Give me a day to write it up." As the day wore on, Jack's folder grew thicker with signed statements of support, contact information, and promises to attend any meetings or protests. His phone buzzed with messages from people he'd spoken to, sharing ideas and offering encouragement. Meanwhile, at Lincoln Elementary, Ethan couldn't contain his excitement during show and tell. His teacher, Ms. Thompson, had asked the class to share something important happening in their lives. "My dad and I found a soldier's letter," Ethan explained, standing straight and tall at the front of the class. "It was supposed to go to his son, but he never got it. Now we're trying to save the house where we found it because some big company wants to knock it down." The classroom erupted with questions. Tommy, whose father was deployed overseas, asked if he could tell his mom about it. Jenny suggested they make posters. Marcus, usually quiet, raised his hand and said his uncle was a lawyer who might be able to help. Miss Thompson watched her students brainstorm ways to help, their young faces animated with purpose. "This is what community means," she said, writing their ideas on the board. "When we see something wrong, we work together to make it right." During recess, Ethan found himself surrounded by classmates. "My mom runs the PTA," said Lisa. "She can tell all the parents." Other children offered to ask their parents for help, to make signs, to spread the word on social media through their older siblings. When Jack picked up Ethan after school, his son was practically bouncing with excitement. "Dad, everyone wants to help, even Billy, and he never wants to help with anything." Ms. Thompson approached them in the parking lot. "Mr. Miller, what your son shared today really moved the class. They're learning that one person's story can bring people together, that standing up for what's right matters. Whatever you need, the school community is here for you." Jack looked down at his son, who was beaming with pride, then at the thick folder of support he'd gathered throughout the day. What had started as a lonely fight was becoming something bigger. In just one day, their two-person stand had grown into a chorus of voices, all saying the same thing. "This matters. This house matters. This history matters." "Thank you," Jack said, his voice rough with emotion. "Thank you all." As they walked to their car, Ethan slipped his small hand into his father's. "See, Dad? We're not alone anymore." Jack squeezed his son's hand, remembering the soldier's words about hope and perseverance. For the first time since receiving the developer's notice, he felt the weight on his shoulders begin to lift. They weren't just fighting for a house anymore. They were fighting for community, for history, for the kind of world where promises made in old letters still meant something. The Saturday morning dawned bright and clear as Ethan dragged 2 garbage bags across the overgrown front lawn. His father followed behind with a rusty wheelbarrow filled with gardening tools they'd borrowed from neighbors. The weeds had grown knee-high, choking out what might have once been flower beds. "Where do we even start, Dad?" Ethan asked, dropping the bags and putting his hands on his hips as he surveyed the yard. Jack ran a hand through his graying hair. "One small piece at a time, buddy. That's how you tackle any big job." They started near the front steps, pulling weeds and collecting old newspapers that had blown against the foundation. Ethan worked with determination, his small hands protected by oversized garden gloves that kept slipping off. "Look what I found," Ethan called out, carefully lifting a ceramic garden gnome from beneath a tangle of dead vines. Though covered in dirt, its red hat and cheerful smile were still visible. "Can we keep him?" "Sure thing," Jack said, watching his son carefully clean the gnome with his sleeve. "He probably gets lonely out here all by himself." As they worked, Mrs. Rodriguez from next door peered over her fence. "You boys need some help?" she called out, already wearing gardening gloves of her own. Before Jack could politely decline, Ethan waved enthusiastically. "Yes, please. We're trying to make our house look nice again." Mrs. Rodriguez disappeared briefly, returning with her own rake and several flowering plants in plastic containers. "These daylilies need a new home," she said, joining them in the yard. "They'll spread like crazy once they take root." The sound of their work drew more attention. Mr. Chin from across the street wandered over with his teenage son, both carrying paint scrapers and brushes. "Those shutters need some attention," Mr. Chen observed, pointing to the peeling paint. "We have some spare exterior paint in the garage." Jack felt overwhelmed by the offers of help, but Ethan's excitement was contagious. Soon, the yard became a hub of activity. The Peterson kids from 2 doors down brought cold lemonade and helped collect branches. Their mother arrived with sandwiches wrapped in wax paper, insisting everyone needed to keep up their strength. The transformation was remarkable. Neighbors shared stories as they worked, telling tales of the house in its glory days. Mrs. Rodriguez remembered garden parties in the backyard, while Mr. Chen recalled the previous owners helping his family when they first moved to the neighborhood. "This house has good bones," Mr. Peterson said, stepping back to admire their progress on the freshly painted shutters. "Just needed some tender, loving care." Ethan worked tirelessly, his face smudged with dirt but beaming with pride. He organized the younger kids into a cleanup crew, making a game of who could fill their trash bag first. Their laughter echoed across the yard, a sound that seemed to breathe life back into the old house. By mid-afternoon, the front yard had been transformed. Fresh mulch bordered neat flower beds where Mrs. Rodriguez's daylilies now sat. The shutters gleamed with new dark green paint, and the walkway had been swept clean. Even the gnome had a place of honor by the front steps, looking as if he'd always belonged there. "Time for a house tour," Ethan announced, leading the group of neighbors toward the front door. Jack started to protest. The inside was still dusty and bare, but the warmth of the community surrounding them made him reconsider. They filed into the house, footsteps echoing on the hardwood floors. But instead of focusing on the work still needed, the neighbors saw possibility. Mrs. Rodriguez immediately spotted the perfect corner for a reading nook. Mr. Chen's son pointed out where a television would fit perfectly, while his father examined the solid craftsmanship of the crown molding. The kitchen became the gathering spot, with everyone squeezing around the old table that came with the house. Someone had brought cookies, and the Peterson kids poured more lemonade. The late afternoon sun streamed through freshly cleaned windows, catching dust motes that danced in the air. Jack stood in the doorway, watching as Ethan proudly showed off the built-in cabinets to his friends. The house that had seemed so empty and daunting that morning now hummed with life. Conversations overlapped, creating a warm symphony of voices that filled every corner. Mrs. Rodriguez touched Jack's arm gently. "You know, a house isn't just walls and a roof. It's the people who fill it with love that make it a home." For the first time since receiving the developer's notice, Jack felt something shift inside his chest. The weight he'd been carrying didn't feel quite so heavy. Here, surrounded by neighbors who had become friends, while watching his son's face glow with happiness, he could finally see what this house could become. The sound of laughter, Ethan's clear and bright, mixing with the deeper chuckles of adults and the giggles of other children, bounced off the walls. It was a sound this old house hadn't heard in decades, but one that felt perfectly at home within its walls. The doorbell rang just as Jack was teaching Ethan how to properly sand down the old window frames. The sound echoed through the half-empty house, making both of them jump. Through the dusty front window, Jack spotted a sleek black car parked in their driveway. "Stay here, buddy," Jack said, placing the sandpaper on the windowsill. His work boots left dusty footprints on the floor as he made his way to the door. Outside stood a man in an expensive charcoal suit, his red tie perfectly knotted at his throat. Behind him, a younger woman in a pencil skirt clutched a leather briefcase. Neither of them smiled. "Mr. Miller?" The man's voice was smooth as polished marble. "I'm Richard Thornton from Evergreen Development Corporation." He didn't extend his hand. Instead, he nodded to his companion, who opened her briefcase and pulled out a thick envelope. Jack's stomach clenched. He could feel Ethan's presence behind him now, hovering in the doorway to the living room. "These are formal eviction papers," Thornton continued, as the woman thrust the envelope toward Jack. "You have 30 days to vacate the premises." Jack's hands trembled as he took the envelope. "But we have the deed. The previous owner gave us—" "The previous owner," Thornton interrupted, "had no legal right to transfer ownership. This property has been slated for development for months. The paperwork was already in process." His lips curved into what might have been meant as a smile, but looked more like a smirk. "You're just making this harder on yourself and your son." At the mention of Ethan, Jack felt his jaw tighten. "We're not leaving," Thornton sighed, as if dealing with a particularly stubborn child. "Mr. Miller, let me be frank. You're a single father working cleaning jobs. We have a team of corporate lawyers. How long do you think you can keep this up?" From behind, Jack came the sound of footsteps on creaky floorboards. Ethan appeared at his side, his small hand slipping into his father's free one. "This is our home now," Ethan said, his voice surprisingly steady. Thornton's eyes flickered to the boy, then back to Jack. "You're setting yourself up for disappointment. And for what? A rundown old house that's barely standing?" He gestured to the peeling paint and sagging gutters. "Be reasonable. Take the relocation assistance we're offering. It's more than fair." Jack opened the envelope with one hand, still holding Ethan's with the other. Inside was a stack of legal documents, their formal language swimming before his eyes. At the bottom of the first page, he saw the number they were offering. It wasn't much, barely enough for a few months' rent somewhere else. "We've already started fixing it up," Ethan protested. "The neighbors are helping us." The woman with the briefcase checked her watch impatiently. Thornton's expression hardened. "Listen carefully, Mr. Miller. This is happening whether you like it or not. The only question is how much time and money you want to waste fighting the inevitable." He straightened his tie. "I've seen this play out dozens of times. The little guy always loses." Jack felt the weight of the papers in his hands, the weight of Thornton's words pressing down on his shoulders. The man was right. How could he possibly fight this? He barely had enough money for groceries, let alone lawyers. The hope that had been building over the past few days began to crumble. "You have 30 days, Thornton repeated. "I suggest you use them wisely." He turned on his heel, his expensive shoes crunching on the gravel driveway as he walked back to the car. Jack closed the door slowly, his hands shaking so badly now that he dropped the envelope. Papers scattered across the worn floorboards. He slumped against the wall, sliding down until he sat on the floor, his head in his hands. "What are we going to do, Dad?" Ethan's voice was small. Jack couldn't look at his son. Maybe he's right. Maybe we're just fooling ourselves." The words tasted bitter in his mouth. "We can't fight these people, Ethan. They have everything. We don't. Money, lawyers, connections." "But Dad—" "I'm sorry, buddy. I'm so sorry." Jack's voice cracked. "I wanted to give you a real home. I wanted—" He couldn't finish the sentence. He heard Ethan's footsteps moving away, and his heart sank even further. But a moment later, the steps returned. Something soft touched his hand. Jack looked up to see Ethan holding out the soldier's letter. The paper was worn at the creases now from being read so many times, but the words inside were as powerful as ever. "Remember what it says, Dad?" Ethan's eyes were bright with determination. "Even in the darkest night, hold on to hope." The soldier wrote that for his son when things seemed impossible too. Jack took the letter with trembling fingers, feeling its weathered texture. He remembered the elderly man's face at the nursing home, how the long-lost words had brought him peace after so many years of wondering. "The soldier never gave up," Ethan continued, sitting down next to his father. "Even when he was far away and scared, he kept believing in something better. We can't give up either." Jack unfolded the letter, his eyes falling on the familiar handwriting. The words blurred as tears welled up, but he blinked them back. His son's small hand found his again, squeezing tight. The developer's threats still hung heavy in the air, and the eviction papers lay scattered around them like fallen leaves. But as Jack held the letter in one hand and his son's hand in the other, he felt something shift inside his chest. It wasn't exactly hope, not yet, but it was the beginning of something stronger than fear. The Bedford Town Hall buzzed with nervous energy as people filed into the wood-paneled meeting room. Rows of metal folding chairs creaked under the weight of concerned citizens. Jack Miller sat in the third row, his work-worn hands clasped tightly in his lap. Next to him, Ethan fidgeted with the edges of the old letter they'd found, now carefully preserved in a plastic sleeve. "There sure are a lot of people," Ethan whispered, his eyes wide as he scanned the crowded room. Jack nodded, trying to hide his anxiety. Their elderly neighbors, the Hendersons, sat to their left, while Mrs. Patterson from the Veterans Widows Group occupied the seat to their right. Behind them sat at least 24 other supporters, wearing hastily made Save the Miller House buttons that Ethan's class had created during art period. At the front of the room, 7 council members sat behind a curved desk, their faces stern under the harsh fluorescent lighting. To their right, a group of men in expensive suits huddled around laptops and presentation boards. The developers team looked confident, their shoes gleaming and their ties perfectly straight. Mayor Thompson's gavel cracked against the wooden block. "This town council meeting will now come to order. Tonight's main agenda item concerns the proposed Crystal View development project and the property dispute regarding 1879 Maple Street." Jack's stomach churned. They'd spent weeks preparing for this moment, gathering signatures and support. But seeing the developers' sleek presentation materials made their homemade posters feel inadequate. Richard Thorne, the lead developer, stood first. His presentation clicked onto the projection screen, showing glossy renderings of modern apartments and shopping centers. "Ladies and gentlemen of the council," Thorne began, his voice smooth as butter, "Bedford stands at a crossroads. The Crystal View development project represents a $50 million investment in our community's future. We're talking about 200 new jobs, increased tax revenue, and modern housing options that will attract young professionals to our aging town." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Thorne clicked through more images, each one showcasing gleaming buildings that looked nothing like Bedford's modest downtown. "The property in question has been derelict for years," Thorne continued. "While we sympathize with Mr. Miller's situation, the fact remains that our legal claim to the property predates his recent acquisition." He emphasized the last word with a slight sneer. "The previous owner had no legal right to transfer the deed," added one of Thorne's lawyers, standing to distribute thick packets to the council members. "Our documentation clearly shows." Jack's heart sank as the lawyer droned on about zoning laws and property rights. Next to him, Ethan clutched the letter tighter, his small face set with determination. Several community members spoke up in support of Jack and Ethan. Mrs. Patterson talked about her late husband, who had grown up next door to the old house. Mr. Henderson shakily stood with his cane to remind everyone about the neighborhood's historical significance. But the developers team had an answer for everything: jobs, progress, the future. Their words made Jack and Ethan's dreams sound small and selfish in comparison. Mayor Thompson checked his watch. "We have time for one more speaker before the council begins deliberations." Ethan tugged at Jack's sleeve. "Dad," he whispered, "can I read it, please?" Jack hesitated. They hadn't planned this. But looking into his son's eyes, he saw the same quiet strength that had carried them through every challenge since losing Ethan's mom. "The chair recognizes Ethan Miller," Mayor Thompson announced, his expression softening slightly at the sight of the small boy making his way to the podium. Ethan carefully removed the letter from its protective sleeve. The paper trembled slightly in his hands as he adjusted the microphone lower. The room fell silent. "This letter was written by Sergeant James Cooper to his son Tommy in 1953, Ethan began, his clear voice carrying through the quiet room. "We found it in the house that's been my home for the past few months. The only real home I remember having since Mom died." Jack's throat tightened as Ethan started reading. "My dearest son, by the time you read this, I pray this war will be long over. I'm writing from a tent in Korea, thinking about the house on Maple Street where your mother is raising you. Every night, I picture you sleeping in your room, the one with the window that looks out on Mrs. Gardner's rose bushes. I dream about the man you'll become. Not the things you'll own or the job you'll have, but the heart you'll carry. This house isn't just walls and a roof. It's the place where I first held you, where you took your first steps, where I promised your mother I'd give you a future worth believing in. Some men here talk about the buildings they'll build when they get home, the fortunes they'll make. But son, I've learned that the greatest wealth isn't in what we build up, but in what we pass down. Love, honor, the courage to stand for what's right, even when it's hard. If I don't make it home, know that this house holds not just my memories, but my hopes. Every creaky floorboard, every chipped windowsill, every midnight prayer whispered in its rooms, They're all part of your heritage. A heritage built not on dollars and cents, but on the dreams of those who came before, believing in those who'd come after. Ethan's voice grew stronger as he continued reading. Tears rolled silently down Mrs. Patterson's cheeks. Even some of the council members were dabbing at their eyes. Whatever you do with this house, Tommy, remember that it's more than property. It's a promise that love endures, that sacrifice matters, that the dreams of fathers can live on through their sons. With all my love and faith in you, Dad. The room remained absolutely still as Ethan carefully folded the letter. Even Richard Thorne had lost his practiced smile, staring at his expensive shoes. Tommy Cooper's words, written decades ago in a distant war, hung in the air like a prayer. In that moment, the gleaming renderings of Crystal View Development seemed to fade into insignificance against the weight of one father's love letter to his son. Ethan walked back to his seat amid complete silence, his small shoulders straight and proud. Jack pulled him close, his own eyes wet with tears. The morning sun streamed through the dusty windows of the old house, casting long shadows across the kitchen table where Jack sat counting small stacks of bills and checks. His coffee had gone cold, forgotten as he focused on organizing the donations that had started arriving after the town meeting. Some were just $5 or $10, tucked into envelopes with encouraging notes. Others were larger contributions from local business owners who'd been moved by Ethan's reading of the soldier's letter. Mrs. Henderson from next door had set up a donation jar at her quilting circle. The veterans group downtown had passed the hat around during their weekly meeting. Even Ethan's classmates had organized a bake sale, raising nearly $200 in quarters and crumpled dollar bills. Jack carefully recorded each amount in a notebook, his handwriting neat and precise. He wanted to make sure every penny was accounted for, every donor thanked properly. The total wasn't enormous, not enough to match the developer's deep pockets, but it was more than he'd expected. More importantly, each contribution felt like a vote of confidence, a small piece of hope. "Dad!" Ethan burst through the front door, his backpack bouncing against his shoulders. "Dad, you won't believe what happened at school today." Jack looked up, smiling at his son's excitement. "What happened, buddy? Remember Jenny from my class? Her mom's a reporter for the local paper." Ethan dropped his backpack and pulled out a slightly wrinkled newspaper. "Look, they wrote about us." Jack took the paper, smoothing it out on the table. There on page 3 was a photo of their house, alongside a story titled, "Historic Home at Center of Community Battle." The article detailed their discovery of the soldier's letter and the ongoing fight to save the property from demolition. "That's not all," Ethan continued, practically bouncing with excitement. "Jenny's mom says people are sharing the story online. She says it's going viral, whatever that means." As if to prove his point, the phone rang. It was Sarah Chen, a local lawyer who'd been giving them informal advice. "Jack," she said, her voice warm with excitement, "have you checked your email today? The story's getting traction. I've had 3 colleagues reach out offering pro bono help with the case." Jack's hands trembled slightly as he thanked her and hung up. He looked around the kitchen, at the peeling wallpaper, the worn linoleum floor, the window that stuck halfway up. It wasn't much, but it was starting to feel like home. And now, for the first time since receiving the demolition notice, he felt a real spark of hope that they might be able to keep it. Throughout the afternoon, more calls came in. A local history society offered to help document the house's significance to the town's heritage. A contractor volunteered to assess the building's structural integrity, hoping to prove it was worth preserving. Even the mayor's office called, requesting a meeting to discuss possible historical designation options. As evening approached, Jack and Ethan sat on the creaky front porch, sharing a pizza dinner while watching the sunset. They'd started this tradition the day they'd received the deed, imaging how they'd fix up the porch once it was truly theirs. Now, those dreams felt a little closer to reality. "Dad," Ethan said between bites, "do you think the soldier knew his letter would help someone else someday?" Jack thought about the carefully written words they'd found, the love and hope contained in that yellowed envelope. "I don't know, buddy, but I think he'd be happy to know it did." "I think so too." Ethan nodded seriously, "and I think he'd like that we're trying to save his house." Later that night, they settled into their familiar spot on the old couch in the living room. The letter lay on the coffee table, a constant reminder of what had brought them here. Ethan had insisted on keeping it close, saying it gave him courage. Jack watched as his son's eyes grew heavy, fighting sleep but losing the battle. Ethan's head gradually settled against his father's shoulder, then slipped down to his lap. The boy's breathing deepened, his face peaceful in sleep, one hand still reaching toward the letter on the table. Looking down at his sleeping son, Jack felt a profound sense of gratitude. Just weeks ago, they'd been struggling alone in their tiny apartment, scraping by day to day. Now they were surrounded by support, fighting for something that mattered, part of a community that cared. Jack gently brushed Ethan's hair back from his forehead. "Maybe this is our miracle," he whispered, his words soft in the quiet room. The house creaked gently around them, as if in agreement, and Jack allowed himself to believe that sometimes, just sometimes, prayers really were answered in unexpected ways. The letter sat silently on the table, its message of love and hope still reaching across the decades, still changing lives in ways its writer could never have imagined. Outside, the stars twinkled over their embattled home, while inside, father and son rested in the warm embrace of newfound hope and possibility. The weekend arrived with the rumble of pickup trucks pulling into the driveway. Jack stood on the worn front porch, overwhelmed by the sight of neighbors pouring out of their vehicles with tools, cleaning supplies, and determined smiles. Mr. Thompson, the retired carpenter from 3 streets over, carried his trusted toolbox. The Rodriguez family brought cleaning supplies and their teenage son's strong backs. Even old Mrs. Henderson shuffled up with a basket of sandwiches for the workers. "We're here to help, Jack," Mr. Thompson said, clapping him on the shoulder. "Can't have you and the boy living in that cramped apartment anymore." Ethan bounced between the volunteers, his energy infectious. "Dad, look how many people came." His eyes sparkled with excitement as he helped unload supplies from the trucks. The house seemed to come alive with activity. In the kitchen, women scrubbed years of grime from the cabinets, while their husbands replaced broken hinges and fixed leaky pipes. The Rodriguez boys tackled the living room windows, making the glass sparkle in the morning sun. Jack worked alongside Mr. Thompson, repairing loose floorboards and patching holes in the walls. "Hey, Dad," Ethan called from upstairs. "Can this be my room?" His voice echoed through the house, filled with hope and possibility. Jack climbed the creaky stairs to find Ethan in a small bedroom with a window overlooking the backyard. Mrs. Rodriguez was already there, helping Ethan wipe down the windowsill. The room was dusty but solid, with good bones and potential. "What do you think?" Ethan asked, his eyes pleading. Jack ran his hand along the freshly cleaned windowsill. "It's perfect, buddy. We'll need to patch that crack in the ceiling, but I can help with that," Mr. Thompson called from the hallway. "Got some spackle in my truck." Throughout the day, the house transformed. The musty smell of abandonment gave way to the sharp scent of pine cleaner and fresh paint. Someone had brought a radio, and classic rock mixed with laughter and friendly chatter echoed through the rooms. During lunch break, they all gathered on the front lawn, sharing Mrs. Henderson's sandwiches and stories. Ethan sat cross-legged in the grass, hanging on every word as Mr. Thompson told tales about the neighborhood's history. By late afternoon, the essential repairs were complete. The water ran clear, the electricity hummed steadily, and the worst of the dirt and cobwebs had been banished. It wasn't perfect. The wallpaper in the hallway still peeled in places, and some of the doors needed new hardware, but it was livable. "Time to bring in your things," Mrs. Rodriguez announced, wiping her hands on her jeans. "My boys will help with the heavy lifting." Jack tried to protest, but she wouldn't hear it. Within an hour, 3 pickup trucks headed to their apartment. The Rodriguez boys made quick work of their few possessions: the worn couch, their beds, boxes of clothes, and Ethan's treasured books. As the sun began to set, the volunteers said their goodbyes, leaving Jack with a list of phone numbers just in case, and promises to return next weekend for more improvements. The house felt different now, warm with the lingering presence of community and care. Jack and Ethan stood in their new living room, surrounded by boxes and mismatched furniture. Their old belongings looked somehow different here, as if they too were getting a fresh start. "Can we sleep here tonight, Dad?" Ethan asked, clutching his pillow. "Please?" Jack looked around. The basics were in place: running water, electricity, and their beds were set up. It wasn't fancy, but it was theirs. "Yeah, buddy, we can sleep here tonight." They worked together to make their beds, Ethan chattering excitedly about his plans for his room. Jack smiled, watching his son bounce around the space, already at home. As night fell, they realized they hadn't brought any groceries. Jack found a box of crackers and some peanut butter in their hastily packed kitchen supplies. They sat cross-legged on the kitchen floor, making impromptu sandwiches under the glow of a camping lantern they'd found in one of the boxes. "This is the best dinner ever," Ethan declared, licking peanut butter from his fingers. Jack laughed, the sound echoing in the empty kitchen. "Really? Better than pizza?" "Way better," Ethan nodded seriously, "because it's our first dinner in our house." He emphasized the word "our" with pride. A blob of peanut butter dropped from Ethan's sandwich onto his shirt, and they both burst out laughing. The sound of their shared joy filled the kitchen, bouncing off the walls and settling into the bones of the house like a blessing. Sitting there on the floor with his son, sharing a simple meal and genuine laughter, Jack felt something shift inside him. This wasn't just a building they were fighting for. It was already their home, filled with hope and possibility. Looking at Ethan's happy face in the lantern light, he knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, this moment made everything worth it. The morning sun filtered through the freshly cleaned windows of their kitchen. Jack stood at the counter, stirring his coffee while watching Ethan tackle his math homework at their makeshift dining table. Really just a fold-out card table they'd found in the basement, but it was theirs, and that made all the difference. The phone rang, its shrill tone cutting through the peaceful morning routine. Jack recognized the number, their lawyer's office. His heart quickened as he answered. "Mr. Miller?" The lawyer's voice was heavy, hesitant. "I'm afraid I have some difficult news." Jack's hand tightened around the phone. "Go ahead. The court ruled this morning. They sided with the developer." The words hit Jack like a physical blow. He steadied himself against the counter, aware of Ethan's curious eyes on him. "There must be some mistake," Jack managed, his voice barely above a whisper. "What about the deed? The previous owner's wishes?" "I'm sorry, Mr. Miller. The developer's legal team successfully argued that the property transfer wasn't properly executed. They've been granted full rights to proceed with demolition." The lawyer paused. "They've set a date, 30 days from today." Jack's coffee cup slipped from his trembling fingers, shattering on the floor. Ethan jumped up, alarm spreading across his young face. "Dad, what's wrong?" The lawyer continued speaking, but Jack could barely process the words. Something about appeals and options, but all he could focus on was the coffee spreading across the floor they'd just scrubbed clean yesterday. "Thank you," Jack muttered into the phone before hanging up. He grabbed a dish towel and knelt to clean up the mess, his movements mechanical. "Dad?" Ethan's voice quivered. "Please tell me what happened." Jack looked up at his son, seeing the fear in those innocent eyes. The same eyes that had lit up with such hope when they'd first gotten the house. The eyes that had sparked with determination during the town meeting. How could he tell him? Jack's voice cracked. He cleared his throat and tried again. "We lost, buddy. The court. They gave the house to the developers." Ethan's face paled. "But they can't. This is our home now. We fixed it up and everything." "They can." Jack's words came out hollow. "They're going to tear it down in 30 days. "No!" Ethan's shout echoed through the house. "That's not fair. What about Mr. Thompson's new porch railings? And Mrs. Henderson's flowers she planted? What about the soldier's letter?" Jack stood slowly, his legs feeling like lead. Sometimes life isn't fair, son." "Then we'll fight harder," Ethan insisted, his small fists clenched. "We'll get more people to help. We'll write to the newspaper again. Ethan, stop." Jack's voice came out sharper than he intended, making his son flinch. He softened his tone. "Just stop, please." The morning light that had seemed so promising minutes ago now felt harsh and mocking. Jack walked to the living room window, staring out at the neighborhood that had become their community. How many hours had these people invested in helping them? How many promises had he made about turning this place into something special? Behind him, he heard Ethan's footsteps following. "Remember what the soldier wrote in his letter, Dad? About never giving up hope?" "That was different," Jack said, his shoulders sagging. "That was a man writing to his son during war. This is just a house." "It's not just a house." Ethan's voice cracked with emotion. "It's our home. It's where you smiled again. It's where people care about us." Jack turned to face his son, feeling the weight of failure crushing him. Everything he'd tried to build for Ethan, everything he'd dared to hope for, was crumbling again, just like after losing Ethan's mother. Just like every other time he'd thought things might get better. "I don't know what else to do," Jack admitted, slumping onto their second-hand couch. "I've tried everything. The lawyers, the town council, the community support. It wasn't enough. I failed you again." Tears welled up in Ethan's eyes. "But Dad," he whispered, his voice small and trembling, "we can't give up now." Jack stared at his hands, unable to meet his son's pleading gaze. The morning ticked by in heavy silence, broken only by the distant sound of birds singing outside. Oblivious to the dreams crashing down around the Miller family. Rain pelted against the windows of the old house, creating a steady drumbeat that matched Jack's troubled thoughts. He sat alone at the kitchen table, illuminated only by a single lamp that cast long shadows across the room. Scattered before him lay a mess of papers, bills marked "Final Notice" in angry red letters, the court's demolition order, and a stack of unpaid invoices from their lawyer. The ancient radiator clanked and wheezed, struggling to keep the drafty house warm. Jack rubbed his tired eyes, the numbers on the papers blurring together. Even with all the community donations, they were drowning in debt. The legal fees alone had eaten through their savings, and now, with the demolition order, he picked up the power bill, his hands trembling slightly. The amount due was more than he'd made in the past 2 weeks of odd jobs. Their fight for the house had meant fewer working hours, and now everything was catching up to them. Thunder crashed outside, making the windows rattle in their frames. The old house creaked and groaned against the wind, almost as if it too felt the weight of impending doom. 30 days. That's all they had left before the bulldozers would come. Jack pushed back from the table and walked to the window, pressing his forehead against the cold glass. Through the rain-streaked pane, he could make out the outline of the maple tree in their yard, the one Ethan had already claimed as perfect for a tire swing. They'd never get the chance now. The floorboards creaked behind him. Jack turned to find Ethan standing in the doorway, hair tousled from sleep, clutching his pillow. "Dad?" Ethan's voice was small against the storm. "I couldn't sleep. The thunder's really loud upstairs." Jack forced a smile. "Come here, buddy." Ethan patted across the floor in his worn Superman pajamas, the ones that were getting too short at the ankles. Another reminder of what Jack couldn't provide. His son slid into the chair next to him, eyes scanning the pile of bills. "Are those all from fighting for the house?" Ethan asked quietly. Jack started to sweep the papers aside, but stopped himself. He'd always tried to be honest with his son. "Yeah, most of them. But don't worry about it, okay? That's my job." "But I do worry," Ethan said, his young face serious in the lamplight. "I heard you talking to Mr. Peterson today about how we might have to move back to the apartment." Jack's throat tightened. He'd hoped Ethan hadn't overheard that conversation. Sometimes things don't work out the way we hope, no matter how hard we try." "Is that why you're crying?" Jack hadn't even realized there were tears on his cheeks. He wiped them away quickly. "Just tired, that's all." Ethan slipped off his chair and disappeared into the dark hallway. Before Jack could call him back, he returned, clutching something carefully in his hands. The soldier's letter. The paper was worn now from many readings, its creases soft and familiar. Ethan smoothed it out on the table, right on top of the pile of bills. His small finger traced the faded words. Remember what he wrote to his son? Ethan's voice was barely a whisper. "Even in the darkest night, hold on to hope." The simple words, spoken with such pure faith, broke something in Jack. He covered his face with his hands, as the tears came freely now. Ethan climbed into his lap, wrapping thin arms around his neck. The letter pressed between them. "Even in the darkest night," Ethan repeated softly. "Hold on to hope." Jack pulled his son close, shoulders shaking with silent sobs as the rain continued to fall outside. The letter, that precious message from another father to another son, lay in his lap, a reminder that even in the deepest despair, love endured. The morning sun struggled through rain-washed windows, casting weak shadows across Jack's face as he opened his eyes. He'd fallen asleep in the rickety kitchen chair, his neck stiff from the awkward position. The bills and court papers were still scattered across the table, now joined by dried teardrops from the night before. Dad, wake up." Ethan's voice carried a surprising energy that made Jack straighten in his chair. His son burst into the kitchen, clutching his tablet. "I know what we need to do." Jack rubbed his eyes, trying to shake off the heaviness of defeat. "What are you talking about, buddy? Remember Tommy from my class? His big sister makes videos that lots of people watch online. She told me sometimes when people share their stories, others want to help." Ethan's eyes sparkled with determination. "We should tell our story, Dad. About the letter, about this house, about everything." Jack started to shake his head. "Ethan, I don't think—" "Please, Dad." Ethan's voice softened. "You always tell me to try my best, even when things seem impossible. Remember what the letter says about hope?" Those words hit Jack hard. Here was his 10-year-old son, showing more courage than he was. He looked at Ethan's hopeful face and felt something shift inside him. Maybe it was time to listen to his boy's wisdom. "Okay," Jack said slowly. "What's your plan?" Ethan's face lit up. He pulled out his tablet and started explaining how they could record themselves reading the letter and sharing their story. His enthusiasm was infectious, and Jack found himself nodding along. They spent the morning preparing. Jack helped Ethan clean up the living room, pushing aside drop cloths and clearing a space by the old fireplace. They found a decent angle where sunlight streamed through the window, giving the room a warm glow despite its worn state. "Should we practice first?" Jack asked, suddenly nervous about being on camera. Ethan shook his head. "No, Dad. We should just be real. That's what Tommy's sister says works best." They set up the tablet on a stack of books, and Ethan carefully positioned them both in frame. Jack held the precious letter in his trembling hands while Ethan sat close beside him. "Hi," Ethan started, his voice clear and strong. "I'm Ethan, and this is my dad, Jack. We want to tell you about a special letter we found and why we need your help." Jack watched in amazement as his son spoke from his heart, describing how they discovered the letter while cleaning the old house. When it was Jack's turn to read the soldier's words, he found his voice growing steady, drawing strength from the paper in his hands and the boy at his side. "My dearest son," Jack read, "as I write this letter, I don't know if I'll make it home, but I want you to know that every step I take, every breath I draw, is with thoughts of you." As Jack read, Ethan leaned against him, and the camera captured their genuine connection, a father and son united in their own struggle, sharing another father's words of love and hope from decades ago. They explained about finding the soldier's son in the nursing home, how he had gifted them the house, and now how they were about to lose it all. Ethan's voice cracked slightly when he described their dreams for the home, a garden where they could grow vegetables, a room where he could do his homework without hearing the neighbors through paper-thin walls, a place that could finally be their own. "We're not asking for money," Jack said, surprising himself with the words. "We just want people to know this story. Maybe someone out there knows how to help us save this house. It's not just about us anymore. It's about keeping alive the hope in this soldier's letter." Ethan reached for the letter and read the final lines himself. "Even in the darkest night, hold on to hope. For as long as we have faith and love, nothing is impossible." They ended the video with Ethan's simple plea. "If this story touches your heart, please share it. Help us keep this soldier's message alive." After they finished recording, Jack and Ethan spent the afternoon figuring out how to post the video online. Ethan's friend Tommy came over with his sister, who helped them write a description and add what she called tags to help people find their story. As evening settled in, they sat together on the old house's front porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. Jack's phone buzzed, their first notification. Someone in town had shared the video. Then another notification. And another. "Look, Dad," Ethan pointed at the screen. "Mrs. Johnson from church shared it. And there's Mr. Peters from the Veterans Hall." The shares kept coming. Their neighbors were spreading the video across their own networks, each share carrying their story further. A local community page picked it up, and then a veterans group from the next town over. Jack watched the numbers climb, each new share representing someone who had been touched by their story, by the soldier's words. He pulled Ethan close, feeling a spark of something he'd almost forgotten. Hope. "Thank you, buddy," he whispered into his son's hair. "For what, Dad?" "For not letting me give up. For showing me that sometimes the bravest thing we can do is just tell our story and trust that someone will listen." As the sun disappeared behind the horizon, father and son stayed on the porch, watching their video begin its journey beyond their small town, carried forward by the power of a soldier's love letter and a boy's unwavering faith. The doorbell's chime echoed through the old house, startling Jack from his morning coffee. Ethan, already dressed for school in his favorite blue t-shirt, peered through the dusty front window. "Dad, there are people with cameras outside." Jack's stomach tightened as he joined his son at the window. Sure enough, 2 news vans were parked along the curb, and several people carrying equipment stood on their front walk. He ran a hand through his disheveled hair, suddenly very aware of his wrinkled work shirt. "Maybe we should just stay quiet," Jack mumbled, but Ethan was already bouncing with excitement. "Dad, this is good. Remember what you always tell me? God works in mysterious ways." Ethan tugged at his father's sleeve. "We have to tell our story. For the soldier, remember?" Jack looked down at his son's earnest face and felt his hesitation melt away. The boy had a way of cutting through his fears with simple truth. He smoothed his shirt, took a deep breath, and opened the front door. "Mr. Miller?" A young reporter stepped forward, microphone in hand. "I'm Sarah Chin from Channel 5 News. We saw your video online, the one with your son reading the soldier's letter. Would you be willing to talk to us about your story?" Before Jack could respond, Ethan stepped forward. "We'd love to, right, Dad?" The reporter smiled at Ethan's enthusiasm, and Jack found himself nodding. Soon they were setting up equipment in the living room, the cameras making the peeling wallpaper and worn floors seem even shabbier. But Ethan didn't notice any of that. He was too busy carefully retrieving the soldier's letter from its safe place in his backpack. The letter just felt special. Jack explained as the cameras rolled. "When we found it hidden away in that box, it was like finding a piece of someone's heart." His voice grew thick with emotion. As a father myself, reading another father's words to his son, it hit home. Ethan sat close to his dad on their old couch, the letter held carefully in his hands. "It wasn't just meant for the soldier's son," he added, making the reporters lean in. "It was meant for all of us, about having hope and never giving up." The morning passed in a blur of interviews. More news crews arrived, and Jack found himself telling their story again and again. How they'd found the letter, tracked down the soldier's son, received the house as a gift, and now faced losing it all to developers. "This isn't just about a house," Jack explained, his voice stronger now. "It's about family, legacy, and keeping promises. That soldier wrote about dreams for his son's future. Now we're fighting for my son's future too." During a break between interviews, Ethan tugged at Jack's sleeve. "Dad, look!" He pointed to his tablet, where their story was already appearing on news websites. The comments section was filling up with messages of support. "Save this house. Veterans stick together. Where can we donate?" Jack's phone buzzed constantly with notifications. Local business owners offered supplies for repairs. A retired carpenter volunteered his services. Former residents of the neighborhood shared old photos and memories of the house in its glory days. By afternoon, the story had spread beyond their small town. Regional news outlets picked it up, focusing on the developer's plan to demolish a piece of military family history. Veterans groups began sharing the video of Ethan reading the letter. "Mr. Miller," one reporter asked, "what do you say to people who argue that progress and development are inevitable?" Jack thought carefully before answering. "Progress is important," he said, "but so is preserving the things that matter. This house isn't just a building, it's a symbol of sacrifice, love, and hope. Sometimes the most important kind of progress is remembering where we came from and what we stand for." As the sun began to set, the news crews finally packed up their equipment. Jack's throat was sore from talking, but Ethan was still energized, watching their story play on the evening news. "We did it, Dad!" he exclaimed. "People are listening!" Jack smiled tiredly, settling into his chair to check his emails. His eyes widened at the newest message in his inbox. The subject line read, "National Veterans Alliance, we stand with you." His hands trembled slightly as he opened it. "Dear Mr. Miller and Ethan, your story has touched hearts across the veteran community. The National Veterans Alliance pledges our full support to your cause. Our legal team will be in touch tomorrow morning to discuss strategy. A soldier's promise to his son should never be forgotten. Neither should our promise to those who served. Stand strong. You're not in this fight alone anymore. Sincerely, Colonel James Hartford, Red, Director, National Veterans Alliance." Jack stared at the screen, tears blurring his vision. He looked up to find Ethan watching him anxiously. "Dad, is everything okay?" Jack pulled his son into a tight hug. "Yeah, buddy," he whispered. "Everything's okay. We've got some new friends in our corner." The morning sun cast long shadows across the worn floorboards as Jack stared at his phone in disbelief. Notification after notification kept appearing, emails, messages, and alerts from a fundraising page someone in town had set up for them. "Dad," Ethan called from the living room, "look at this." Jack walked over to where his son sat, cross-legged on their old couch, tablet in hand. The local news website was displaying their story front and center, complete with pictures of the house and quotes from their video. 5,000 shares already, Ethan said, his eyes wide with wonder. "People really care about our house, Dad." A knock at the door interrupted them. Jack opened it to find Sarah Chen, a lawyer from downtown, standing on their porch with a leather briefcase. "Mr. Miller," she said warmly, "I saw your story this morning. I specialize in property law, and I'd like to offer my services pro bono." Before Jack could respond, a car pulled up, then another. People began emerging from vehicles carrying handmade signs. "Save the Miller House," read one. "Veterans' Legacy Matters," declared another. "This is incredible," Jack whispered, his voice thick with emotion. Ethan bounced on his toes beside him. "Look, Dad, there's my teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, and Tommy from my class." More cars arrived. The front yard filled with familiar faces. The elderly couple from 3 doors down, the grocery store owner who sometimes slipped Ethan extra candy, veterans in their service caps who had heard their story. Jack's phone buzzed again. This time it was a message from a national veterans organization. "We stand with you. Legal team en route. Check your fundraising page." With trembling fingers, Jack opened the donation page. The number made his knees weak, over $50,000 in just a few hours. Contributions were pouring in from across the country, many accompanied by messages of support. My father was a veteran too. Keep fighting. This house deserves to be saved. For all the military families out there. The crowd in the yard had swollen to fill the street. Children waved American flags. Someone had brought a megaphone and was leading chants. The local news crew that had interviewed them earlier was back, capturing the spontaneous gathering. "Mr. Miller," called a voice. It was Tom Watson, the retired judge who lived nearby. "I've made some calls. We've got 3 more attorneys joining Sarah to help build your case. We're not letting some developer steal this piece of history." Ethan tugged at Jack's sleeve. "Dad, can we go outside?" Jack nodded, his heart full to bursting. Together, they stepped onto the creaky porch. The crowd erupted in cheers at their appearance. "Thank you," Jack tried to say, but his voice caught. Ethan squeezed his hand. A group of veterans in the front raised their hands in salute. Behind them, mothers hoisted children onto shoulders for a better view. Neighbors who had been strangers just days ago now stood shoulder to shoulder, united in purpose. The chant started softly at first, then grew stronger. "Save the house! Save the house! Save the house!" The words echoed down the street, bouncing off old buildings and reaching toward the sky. Jack felt Ethan's small hand tighten in his as they stood together, watching their private struggle transform into a community's cause. Mrs. Peterson, the grandmother who lived next door, pushed through the crowd with tears in her eyes. She pressed a pie into Jack's hands. "We're all with you, dear," she said, patting his arm. "This house means something to all of us now." More people were arriving by the minute. Cars lined both sides of the street for blocks. The police had shown up to direct traffic, but instead of dispersing the crowd, the officers joined in, holding their own hastily made signs. Jack looked down at Ethan, whose face shone with joy and wonder. His son had never stopped believing, even when Jack's own faith had wavered. The old soldier's letter had started this. But it was Ethan's pure heart that had touched so many others. "Dad," Ethan whispered, watching the scene before them, "is this what a miracle feels like?" Jack couldn't speak past the lump in his throat. He simply nodded, pulling his son close as the crowd continued their chant, "Save the house! Save the house! Save the house!" The morning sun climbed higher, warming the old porch where father and son stood together, surrounded by a sea of support they never could have imagined just days before. The house behind them seemed to stand a little straighter, its windows reflecting the light of hundreds of hopeful hearts gathered in its defense. The courthouse loomed before them, its stone facade stern and imposing in the early morning light. Jack straightened his borrowed tie, his fingers trembling slightly. Beside him, Ethan reached up and squeezed his hand. "We've got this, Dad," Ethan whispered, his young face showing a maturity beyond his years. The main courtroom buzzed with whispered conversations. Every wooden bench was packed, veterans in their service caps, neighbors Jack recognized from down the street, and even some of Ethan's teachers. At the front, suited developers sat with their legal team, their expressions confident and unbothered. Jack's pro bono lawyer, Sarah Chin, arranged her papers at their table. She'd taken their case after seeing Ethan's video online, and her calm presence helped steady Jack's nerves. "All rise," the bailiff called out. The Honorable Judge Marcus Thompson presiding. The judge, a man with silver hair and wire-rimmed glasses, took his seat and gestured for everyone to sit. "We're here today regarding Miller versus Greenfield Development Corporation, concerning property rights and demolition orders for 1847 Oak Street. Miss Chin, you may present your case." Sarah stood, smoothing her blazer. "Your Honor, this case is about more than property rights. It's about legacy, community, and the sacred bonds between fathers and sons." She held up the soldier's letter, carefully preserved in a plastic sleeve. This letter, found in the house in question, represents a connection across generations. The developer's lawyer, Mr. Patterson, shifted in his seat. "Objection, Your Honor. The emotional appeal is irrelevant to the legal matter at hand." "Overruled," Judge Thompson said. "But counsel, please keep to the pertinent facts." Sarah nodded. "The letter establishes a clear lineage of ownership, Your Honor. The previous owner, Mr. Robert Thompson, no relation to yourself, legally gifted the property to my client. We have the deed transfer documents here." She passed copies to the clerk. Mr. Patterson stood. "Your Honor, Greenfield Development purchased development rights for that entire block 2 years ago. Mr. Thompson's claim to the property was already disputed at that time." "If I may," Sarah countered, "those development rights were contingent on all properties being abandoned or in tax default. This house was neither. Mr. Thompson maintained property tax payments through a trust account, which we've documented here." In the gallery, Ethan sat between two elderly veterans who had become regular visitors to the house. They'd help clean up the yard and fix broken windows, sharing stories of their own service while they worked. One of them patted Ethan's shoulder reassuringly. Mr. Patterson approached the bench with his own stack of documents. "Your Honor, the development project represents a $15 million investment in the community. We're talking about jobs, economic growth, and modern housing units this town desperately needs." The judge reviewed the papers, his expression unreadable. "Ms. Chen?" Sarah gestured to the packed courtroom. "Your Honor, I'd like to draw attention to the community present today. These people aren't here for economic growth statistics. They're here because this house and what it represents matters to them." She held up the letter again. A soldier wrote this to his son before making the ultimate sacrifice. That son grew up without his father, but kept this house as his connection to his family's history. Now he's passed that connection to my client and his son. Jack watched as the judge studied the crowd, noting the veterans' caps, the familiar faces of neighbors, the children sitting quietly beside their parents. Mr. Patterson cleared his throat. "While the story is touching, Your Honor, it doesn't change the legal framework. Greenfield has invested considerable resources based on approved development plans. The emotional appeal of one family cannot outweigh the broader economic interests of the community." Sarah walked to her table and picked up a thick folder. "Your Honor, I'd like to present these petitions signed by over 5,000 local residents opposing the demolition. Additionally, we have letters from 3 historical preservation societies noting the architectural significance of the house and its potential eligibility for protected status." The developer's table buzzed with whispered conversations. Mr. Patterson accepted the documents from the clerk with a slight frown. "Furthermore," Sarah continued, "we have proof that Greenfield Development failed to properly notify all stakeholders during the initial property assessment. The trust account maintaining the property taxes was active and registered, yet received no notification of the development plans." Judge Thompson leaned forward, examining the trust documents. The courtroom remained silent, except for the soft shuffling of papers and the occasional cough. Mr. Patterson stood again. "Your Honor, even if there were procedural oversights, the economic reality remains. One outdated house is standing in the way of progress that could benefit hundreds of families." "Progress?" Sarah questioned. "Or profit? Because we have evidence that Greenfield's proposed affordable housing units would be priced well above what most local families could afford." Jack felt Ethan's hand slip into his again. Looking down at his son, he saw the same quiet determination that had carried them through these past weeks. The letter that had started everything sat on their table, its aged paper containing words that had somehow reached across decades to change their lives. Judge Thompson removed his glasses and rubbed his eyes. "I've heard compelling arguments from both sides. This case presents complex issues of property rights, community interests, and procedural requirements." He replaced his glasses and looked at both tables. "Given the significance of this decision and the volume of evidence presented, I'll need time to review everything thoroughly before making my ruling." The tension in the room grew thicker. Jack could feel the collective held breath of their supporters. "We'll reconvene in 3 days," the judge announced. "Until then, all demolition preparations are to cease." He struck his gavel once. "Court is adjourned." The gallery erupted in whispered conversations. Mr. Patterson huddled with the developers, their faces tight with concern. Sarah turned to Jack and Ethan, her expression cautiously optimistic but professional. Ethan tugged on Jack's sleeve. "What does this mean, Dad?" Jack squeezed his son's shoulder, watching as their supporters filed out of the courtroom. The letter sat between them on the table, its presence as powerful as ever. "It means we wait, buddy. We wait and we hope." The judge gathered his papers, the rustle echoing in the now quieting courtroom. The future of their home hung in the balance, suspended in the space between hope and uncertainty. As they all filed out into the bright morning sun, the oak-paneled courtroom fell silent as the bailiff's voice rang out. "All rise." The Honorable Judge Sarah Martinez presiding. Jack's hand tightened around Ethan's smaller one as they stood. The familiar faces that had supported them through this journey filled the benches behind them. Veterans with weathered faces, neighbors clutching handmade signs, and even some of Ethan's classmates who had begged their parents to let them attend. The judge settled into her high-backed chair, her expression unreadable as she adjusted her reading glasses. Stacks of documents covered her desk, with the soldier's letter, now protected in a clear sleeve, resting on top. The letter that had started it all, that had brought them to this moment. On the other side of the courtroom, the developer's legal team sat rigid in expensive suits, their briefcases gleaming. They exuded confidence, but Jack noticed one of them nervously clicking his pen. After careful consideration of all evidence presented, Judge Martinez began, her voice steady and clear, including property records, historical documentation, and testimonies from both parties. I am prepared to deliver my ruling. Ethan's grip on Jack's hand grew tighter. Jack could feel his son's pulse racing through their joined hands, matching his own thundering heartbeat. The air felt thick with tension, making it hard to breathe. The matter before this court today transcends mere property rights, the judge continued. We are tasked with weighing the interests of commercial development against the preservation of heritage, community, and family legacy. Jack watched as she lifted the soldier's letter, holding it carefully, as if it were made of delicate glass. This letter, written by Private James Henderson to his son over 5 decades ago, represents more than just words on paper. It embodies the sacrifices made by our service members and the enduring bonds of family. The judge paused, surveying the packed courtroom. The developer's claim rests on technical grounds. A series of property transfers they argue invalidates the current deed. However, the law must serve justice, not merely technical interpretations. In the gallery, an elderly veteran dabbed at his eyes with a handkerchief. The developer's lead attorney shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Furthermore, Judge Martinez continued, the community's overwhelming response cannot be ignored. The law exists to serve people, to protect not just property rights but the very fabric of our communities. Jack felt a tear roll down his cheek. Ethan reached up with his free hand and wiped it away, just as Jack had done for him so many times before. Mr. Miller and his son Ethan have demonstrated extraordinary dedication, not just to preserving a house, but to honoring the legacy of a fallen soldier and bringing healing to his family. They have transformed what could have been a simple real estate dispute into a testament to the power of community and compassion. The judge set down her papers and removed her glasses, looking directly at Jack and Ethan. Young man, she addressed Ethan, who stood straighter, your courage in sharing that letter, in fighting for what you believe in, has touched many hearts, including mine. Ethan's chin quivered, but he held his head high. Jack had never been prouder. Therefore, it is the ruling of this court that the property deed held by Jack and Ethan Miller is valid and binding. The developer's claim is hereby dismissed, and all demolition orders are permanently stayed. The courtroom erupted. Veterans stood, saluting. Neighbors hugged each other, crying and laughing at once. Ethan's classmates jumped up and down, their excited squeals filling the air. Jack fell to his knees, pulling Ethan into a tight embrace. His son's tears soaked into his shoulder, but Ethan was smiling, the brightest smile Jack had seen since losing his mother. Around them, the celebration continued to grow, a tidal wave of joy and relief washing over everyone present. Order! Order in the court, the bailiff called out, but even he was smiling. Judge Martinez allowed the celebration to continue for a moment before gently tapping her gavel. Additionally, she added once the room quieted somewhat, this court recommends that the property be registered as a historical site, ensuring its preservation for future generations. More cheers erupted. The developer's lawyers quietly gathered their papers and slipped out of the courtroom, but nobody noticed their departure. The victory was too sweet, too complete to waste attention on those who had tried to take their dream away. A group of veterans surrounded Jack and Ethan, forming a protective circle of proud, tearful faces. One of them, his service cap adorned with medals, stepped forward and saluted them both. "Welcome home, soldiers," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You fought a different kind of battle, but you fought it with honor." Ethan returned the salute, standing as tall as his 10-year-old frame would allow. Jack watched his son, remembering the scared little boy who had moved from apartment to apartment, never having a real home. Now here he stood, transformed by love, hope, and the power of believing in something bigger than himself. The judge's gavel sounded one final time. "This court is adjourned," she announced, but her usual stern demeanor softened as she added, "And Mr. Miller, Mr. Ethan, congratulations on your home." The word home echoed in Jack's heart as he held his son close, surrounded by their chosen family of supporters. They had done more than save a house. They had created a home, not just for themselves, but for an entire community. As the cheers continued to fill the courtroom, Jack silently thanked the soldier whose letter had started it all, knowing that somewhere he was smiling too. Late afternoon sunlight streamed through the freshly cleaned windows of the old house, casting warm patterns across the hardwood floors. The rooms buzzed with cheerful conversation and laughter as neighbors, veterans, and newfound friends filled every corner of what was now officially the Millers' home. Jack stood in the doorway of the kitchen, taking in the scene before him. Just months ago, these rooms had been empty and dust-covered. Now they were alive with the warmth of community. Betty from next door arranged homemade cookies on mismatched plates, while her husband Tom helped set up folding chairs in the living room. "Dad!" Ethan's excited voice cut through the chatter. "Mr. Rodriguez brought his famous tamales." The 10-year-old weaved through the crowd, his eyes bright with joy. Jack smiled, ruffling his son's hair. "Better grab some before they disappear then, buddy." Veterans in their formal uniforms mingled with young families. Children darted between adults' legs, playing an impromptu game of tag. The old house seemed to embrace it all, its walls soaking in the sound of life and celebration. Sarah Chin, the pro bono lawyer who had fought for them in court, raised her paper cup in Jack's direction. "To new beginnings," she called out, and others joined in the toast. "To new beginnings," the crowd echoed, and Jack felt his throat tighten with emotion. Near the fireplace, Mr. Thompson, one of the older veterans, studied the soldier's letter that had started it all. It was now carefully preserved in a simple frame. "This reminds me so much of letters I wrote home," he said softly to those gathered around him, never knowing if they'd make it. Ethan appeared at Jack's side again, tugging at his sleeve. "Dad, can we show them now?" Jack checked his watch and nodded. "I think it's time." He cleared his throat and tapped a spoon against his cup, the sharp ring cutting through the chatter. "Everyone," he called out, his voice steady despite his nerves. "Ethan and I would like to show you something special." The crowd followed as father and son led the way up the stairs. The second-floor hallway had been transformed from its previous state of disrepair. Fresh paint covered the walls, and new carpeting muffled their footsteps. They stopped at a door near the end of the hall. A small brass plaque gleamed on its surface, but a cloth still covered the engraving. Ethan stood straight and proud beside his father, barely containing his excitement. "When we first found that letter," Jack began, his voice carrying to the gathered crowd, "we didn't know how much it would change our lives. It wasn't just about saving this house. It was about understanding what home really means. Not just four walls and a roof, but the people who fill it with love and support." He placed his hand on Ethan's shoulder. "My son taught me that when you find something meaningful, you have a responsibility to share it. So we decided to dedicate this room to the soldier who wrote that letter, and to all veterans who've sacrificed so much for their families and country." Ethan stepped forward, reaching for the cloth covering the plaque. "May I, Dad?" Jack nodded, and Ethan pulled the cloth away. The brass plaque read, "Veterans Memorial Room, where letters find their way home." Mr. Thompson wiped at his eyes as Jack opened the door. The room inside had been transformed. Display cases lined the walls, containing carefully preserved military memorabilia donated by local veterans. Photographs showed young men and women in uniform, their faces full of determination and hope. In the center, on a simple wooden pedestal, sat a replica of the original letter in a glass case, its words visible to all. "We want this to be a place where stories can be shared," Jack explained, his voice soft with emotion. "Where children can learn about sacrifice and courage, and where veterans know they're not forgotten." The crowd moved slowly into the room, voices hushed with respect. Some of the veterans stepped forward to examine the displays, pointing out familiar insignias and medals. Others stood silent, lost in their own memories. Mrs. Martinez, whose son was currently serving overseas, touched the glass case containing the letter. "This is beautiful," she whispered. A small desk in the corner held blank paper and pens, with a sign that read, "Share your story." Already, a few pages filled with handwritten memories sat in a collection box beside it. Ethan stood in the middle of the room, watching everyone's reactions. His face glowed with pride as he explained to his friends about different items in the displays, repeating stories he'd learned from the veterans who had donated them. Jack observed it all from the doorway, his heart full. The house had become more than just a home. It was now a bridge between past and present, between strangers who had become family. The soldier's words about holding on to hope had proven true beyond anything they could have imagined. Mr. Thompson made his way back to Jack, placing a weathered hand on his arm. "You've done something remarkable here, son," he said, his voice gruff with emotion. "That letter found exactly who it was meant to find." The afternoon light slanted through the room's windows, catching the glass displays and creating small rainbows on the walls. Children pressed their noses against the cases, asking questions about the medals and photographs. Veterans shared stories with eager listeners, their voices carrying the weight of history and the lightness of being truly heard. In one corner, Ethan had gathered a small group around him as he read aloud from the soldier's letter one more time. The familiar words filled the room. Even in the darkest night, hold on to hope, for it is in our darkest moments that we discover our greatest strength. The words seemed to settle into the very foundation of the house, a promise kept and a legacy honored. The room wasn't just a memorial. It was a living testament to the power of hope, community, and the unexpected ways that love could bridge generations. "Dad!" Ethan's voice carried across the room as he weaved through the crowd of well-wishers. His eyes sparkled with excitement, and his cheeks were flushed from running around showing guests the house. Jack smiled, watching his son approach. The past few months had changed them both, but the transformation in Ethan was remarkable. Gone was the quiet uncertainty that used to shadow his eyes. In its place blazed a confident determination that made Jack's heart swell with pride. "What's up, buddy?" Jack asked, ruffling Ethan's hair as the boy reached him. Ethan grabbed his father's hand, tugging him toward the quieter hallway. "Can we talk for a minute? Just us?" Jack nodded, following his son away from the cheerful noise of the celebration. They ended up in what would soon be Ethan's bedroom, still empty except for a few boxes and his old bed from the apartment. The afternoon sun painted the walls golden through the bare windows. "You okay?" Jack asked, settling down on one of the moving boxes. Ethan paced the room, his sneakers scuffing against the floor. He seemed nervous but determined, reminding Jack of himself when making important decisions. "Dad, I've been thinking," Ethan started, stopping his pacing to face his father. "You know how our lawyer, Mr. Thompson, helped us save our house?" Jack nodded, remembering the kind-faced attorney who had worked tirelessly on their case. "And remember how scared we were when we thought we might lose everything?" Ethan continued, his voice growing stronger. "But Mr. Thompson knew exactly what to do. He knew how to make the judge understand about the soldier's letter and why this house matters so much." "He sure did," Jack agreed, beginning to see where this was heading. Ethan took a deep breath. "I want to be like him, Dad. I want to be a lawyer when I grow up." His words tumbled out faster now. "I want to help people who think they don't have a chance. People like us, who just need someone to fight for them." Jack felt his throat tighten with emotion. He remembered all the nights he'd laid awake, worrying that his struggles would limit Ethan's dreams. Yet here was his son, inspired by their hardship rather than defeated by it. "I know it's a lot of school," Ethan added quickly, mistaking Jack's silence for doubt. "And I know it costs money, but I'll study really hard, and maybe I could get scholarships and—" "Ethan," Jack interrupted gently, standing up to face his son. "Look at me." The boy's eager eyes met his father's, hope and uncertainty mingling in their depths. "You can be anything you set your mind to," Jack said firmly. "And if being a lawyer is what you want, then we'll figure it out together. Just like we figured out how to save this house." "Really?" Ethan's face lit up. "You think I could do it?" Jack thought about how his 10-year-old son had stood before the town council, reading that soldier's letter with such conviction that he'd moved hardened hearts. How he'd never lost faith, even when Jack himself had faltered. How he'd understood, with a wisdom beyond his years, that some things were worth fighting for. "I don't just think you could do it," Jack replied, his voice thick with emotion. "I think you'd be amazing at it. You already understand the most important part of being a lawyer, standing up for what's right." Ethan launched himself into his father's arms, hugging him tightly. "Thanks, Dad," he whispered. Jack held his son close, marveling at how much Ethan had grown. Not just in height, but in spirit. Through all their struggles, through the uncertainty and fear, something beautiful had blossomed in his boy's heart. A desire to help others, to fight for justice, to make a difference in the world. "You're already becoming the man I always hoped you'd be," Jack whispered, holding his son tight. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the freshly tilled garden bed where Jack knelt, his hands deep in the rich soil. 6 months had passed since they'd won their battle for the house, and the property was slowly transforming. Where weeds once choked the front yard, neat rows of vegetables now sprouted tender green shoots. Jack had discovered that working the earth brought a peace he hadn't known he was missing. He sat back on his heels, wiping sweat from his forehead with the back of his hand. The spring air carried the sweet scent of newly planted flowers, marigolds and petunias that lined the walkway. Their bright colors a welcome change from the gray emptiness that had dominated the property for so long. Through the kitchen window, he could see Ethan at the table, bent over his homework. His son's face wore the serious expression he'd developed lately, the one that reminded Jack so much of himself. Textbooks and papers spread across the wooden surface, evidence of Ethan's newfound dedication to his studies. Jack stood, brushing dirt from his knees, and headed inside. The screen door creaked softly, Another item on his endless repair list, but he didn't mind. Each squeak and creak of this old house had become familiar, almost musical. "How's the homework coming along?" Jack asked, washing his hands at the kitchen sink. Ethan looked up, tapping his pencil against his social studies book. "Good. We're learning about the Constitution and civil rights." His eyes lit up the way they always did when talking about law and justice these days. "Did you know that even really old laws can be changed if they're not fair?" Jack dried his hands on a dish towel, smiling at his son's enthusiasm. "Is that so?" "Yeah. Like, if enough people stand up and say something's wrong, they can make things better." Ethan sat straighter in his chair. "That's what I want to do, Dad. I want to help people like those lawyers helped us." The words touched something deep in Jack's heart. Since their victory, Ethan had talked more and more about becoming a lawyer. What had started as a spark during their fight for the house had grown into a steady flame of purpose. "You know," Jack said, pulling out a chair to sit beside his son, "I think that soldier would be proud to know his letter helped inspire you like this." Ethan nodded solemnly. "Sometimes I read it again, you know? The part where he talks about believing in something bigger than yourself." He glanced toward the living room. "Can we put it somewhere special so we never forget?" Jack considered the request. The letter had been carefully preserved in its envelope, tucked away in his dresser drawer. But Ethan was right. It deserved better. "I think I have just the thing," Jack said, standing. He disappeared into the basement, returning minutes later with an old picture frame he'd been saving for a special project. The wood was solid oak, and though it needed refinishing, its craftsmanship was evident. Together, they carefully removed the letter from its envelope. The paper had yellowed with age, but the words remained clear and strong. Jack watched as Ethan's fingers traced the edges reverently before they placed it in the frame. "Perfect," Ethan whispered as Jack hung it on the mantel. They stood back, admiring how the evening light caught the glass. The soldier's handwriting seemed to glow, each word a testament to love that transcended time. Jack wrapped an arm around Ethan's shoulders, marveling at how this single letter had altered not just one life decades ago, but had now shaped his own son's future in ways he never could have imagined. "I should start dinner," Jack said softly, not wanting to break the peaceful moment, but aware of growing hunger. "How about your favorite? Spaghetti and meatballs?" Ethan's face brightened. "Can I help?" "Always." They moved to the kitchen together, falling into their familiar routine. Ethan gathered ingredients while Jack filled a pot with water. Soon, the kitchen filled with the comforting aroma of tomato sauce and herbs. As they worked, Jack caught glimpses of the letter's frame through the doorway, its presence a reminder of the journey that had brought them here. The kitchen had become the heart of their home, where homework sessions turned into cooking lessons and quiet dinners became opportunities for sharing dreams. Tonight was no different. As they sat down to their meal, steam rising from full plates, the sound of forks against dishes mixing with comfortable conversation. This was what home felt like, Jack realized. Not just the walls and roof, but these moments of connection, of shared purpose and understanding. He watched Ethan twirl spaghetti around his fork with practiced ease, saw the contentment in his son's expression, and knew with absolute certainty that they were exactly where they were meant to be. On the mantel, the soldier's letter stood as a silent witness to their happiness, its message of hope and legacy living on through new dreams taking root in fertile soil. What would you do if you were in their place? Comment your answer below and let's see how you'd rewrite the ending. If you enjoyed the story of Jack Miller, I handpicked the next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.